Hello and welcome to Section 8, Part 14. Bit of a different video today. We're going to cover just some stuff on spacing. So if on the last video, if you recall, the spacing wasn't quite working out. I've created this diagram which will probably be useful to reference back to, particularly later on when we go to like assign keys to modify different spacing types. And there is quite a few, as you can see from the diagram. It gets quite complex when we're figuring out group positions and entity positions and different size groups and all that sort of, and factoring in different size groups and entities and all that. So just to explain this diagram, S here is where you have clicked when you're going to move a selection. And in this case, we've got a selection of 3 groups, which is denoted by these squares, which are the groups. So we've got a 4-man group, a 2-man group, and a 3-man group. And then the solid green squares will be the calculated group positions, and the dotted black lines are the entity positions. If you recall, the steps to calculate a formation position is we calculate the group positions, and then we calculate then we assign the groups to positions. And then we calculate the actual group positions. And then we sort of do the same thing for the entities. So let's just duplicate this. Calculate the entity positions. And then we assign the entity positions. So just looking at that, it all starts with this total spacing here. And this is how we get like a estimate for our group positions. So our group position, well, our start position will be in the center. So we start with the selection point. Then what we're going to do is establish an average of the group positions. What we'll do there is we'll say, well, this is the first group position. And then we get this total distance and divide it by the amount of groups. This would be 2 even positions here. That'd be roughly like here and here. And that will be the group positions for assigning the group positions. And then we run the calculation that, sees which group is closer or is best to take whatever position. And then once we know what group is going to what position, so say it's worked out like this, 4, 3, 2, we can then go ahead and calculate the actual. So this first initial pass is not factoring in the size of the groups and how many units are in it, just the total spacing divided by how many groups, rough positions. And now we want to go and calculate the actual group positions. So we'll factor in that this center group is 4 wide, and then that'll factor in the other positions on the outer edges. And to factor in those actual positions, there's a bit of calculation that we need to do. So we're going to need the total group spacing to be able to do that. And to do that total group spacing, if you can see up here where I've got it's the sum of all the entity spacing in that group. And the entity spacing here, which I've shown in blue here, is made up of the required spacing. So we're getting this from the entity data. So, you could have different entities that are different sizes. So this is its sort of like its collision area, the absolute minimum required spacing that the entity needs to fit. And then we have in our group data, we have just how far we want the units in the group to be spaced. So so the combination of those two makes up our entity spacing for one entity. So this like arrow here, from the center of this to the center of that is one entity spacing, but it actually goes from the center of the entity out to halfway here. So it's the spacing that it requires. But anyway, the reason why I've shown it like this at the top here is when we do the calculation for an odd group like this, we need to add that half at the start, and that'll come up later when we look at the calculations. So we need to add half at the start, and then that gives us the first position. And then for the next one, we need to add a full entity spacing to get the next position. And I think where we've made a mistake in we'll go through it and see, but I think where we've made a mistake is we haven't factored in the rest of that spacing there. So there's another whole unit spacing to go on either side, and I think over multiple groups that adds up, and that's what's collapsing in the sides. But the total group spacing is, so you can see here, if you look at this, there's one entity spacing in the middle, entity spacing here, so that's 3, and then we've got 2 halves on the side, that's 4. So it's the sum of, if you add entity spacing for each entity, that's what we want for the group to be. And it'll be the same here. Would have, one to that you don't need that half in the center anymore, so it's just one spacing out here, one spacing out there, that's 2, and then you got the halves on the end to complete the group's required spacing. And then in the group data, we also have group spacing. So there's an actual setting for how far apart you want the groups. And I think at the moment what's happening is our group spacing is starting here like this. We're missing this on either side. When we do go to calculate the actual group position, we need to use half of this calculation here. So the first group will always be in the center where you click, right? Whether it's odd or an even, it's always going to be, to calculate the next group position, it's always going to be 50% of the required spacing of that first group, the group spacing, and then 50% of this group's required spacing, and that equals the next position. So that's the other thing we need to look at to make sure we're factoring in all that. Hope that's clear. I've written down the calculations up here, and we may change some of our naming in our code just to reflect this so we can follow along a bit better. But this is what we want to achieve. And then later on, when we want to have more control over our groups, we can, instead of reading this group spacing straight from the data, we'll assign the default from the group data at the start, but it will be a variable on our group. And then we can modify that variable with, like hold Alt and wheel mouse will change the group spacing. Selecting a group maybe and holding Alt will change the entity spacing, so you can space them out, actual individual entities. Whatever keys, but you can change that spacing on the fly and do different things. All right. So let's have a look what we've got. All right, so we're going to start in the player controller command, and we're going to come down to server issue command, because we want the create command. So where the command is created, and we're updating the command data. This is where we need to start, because this is where we're going to start get command navigation data. And this is, okay, so this is where we need to be. So this is where we, start getting spacings and things like that. So let's just have a look at our navigation data, what fields we've got here. Now this is the top level data. So we're going to need, if we come back to our diagram, we're going to want the total group spacing, and we're going to want the actual group spacing from the data. So those two things, and sorry, this should be selection spacing. So that's going to get super confusing with two group spacings. Okay, that's better. So in our data here, we've got selection spacing and group spacing, so that's correct. Let's just confirm how we're arriving at that. So we've got average selection spacing. Have a look at that. So our selection spacing, like I said, is the sum of entity spacing, which is the required spacing, and the group entity spacing. So it looks like here we're going through each selection, and we're getting, so this looks like it's going to be the total, this is not the selection. Yeah, this is the total selection spacing. I'm going to rename this to reflect that. This is going to be total selection spacing, and I'm going to rename this as well to get total selection spacing. Let's be more clear, because that's what we're doing. We're getting the spacing. So we see we're going to each selection and getting its spacing requirement. So in here, we've got our group entity spacing. So back in here, that's the group entity spacing there from the data, how far apart the group wants each entity in its group to be. And then we're going through and we're getting the minimum spacing required for each entity. So we're adding those together. So if you look at our form here, the entity spacing is the required entity spacing plus the group entity spacing. And that's what we're doing there. And the sum of that is the selection spacing. So that gives us this. That's right, which would factor in those edge cases there, so maybe it wasn't that that's causing it. All right, let's keep going. So we'll come back to here and then go back to our... All right, this is selected, get average spacing requirement, average group spacing requirement. So I think this is this initial, yeah, so what we're doing here is this at the bottom. So we're getting the total spacing, which we could probably pass in. So we're just getting the group spacing, default group spacing. Oh, I see what we're doing. So we're getting all the different group spacings. Groups could have different spacings. I think the reason why I put that in is because you want certain groups that have different spacings. I think we're going to add another one just to make it a bit more complicated, because the group spacing is like a fixed thing. So this will be formation groups. So many group spacings. And this is going to be a variable on, I think the group, just the group. Run out of colors. This is sort of how I think this would work. So this group would have its spacing, and you'd have the entity spacing. I have to space this out a bit so you can see it. That's how that would probably have to go. And then this is a fixed thing, and this is a variable thing. That aside, we're just going to roll with the group spacing. And so what this is doing is getting all the group spacings and taking an average. So if this group over here had a group spacing of 250 and this one had of 500, you know, it's going to work out to be somewhere in between. So it's roughly calculating those group positions at the start. That's what's going on here. Getting all the group spacings and taking an average. We just have to make sure we're passing in an average spacing here, so we don't want to use that later as the actual group spacing. So what I'm going to do in here, I'm actually going to rename this variable to average group spacing. So we see that later. That's our initial data for our group. That's fine. So let's go back to where this comes from. So now the next time that we go to update data is when we go to calculate the formation. So let's go to that, which is just here in our create command navigation. We're going to create formation, and we're going to create the formation positions, which is what this is. So let's rename this to our code, calculate formation positions. All right, that's what we're going to do here. So we come through, we're going to check if we've got an odd group or not. So if it's even, we need to do the 50%. So what's this here? So if it's the first group and it's an odd group count, which is this one over here, then the position is just the position. Like it's where it'll be exactly where the selection is. It doesn't have to be offset to the side. We're not really showing that here because we've got an odd number of groups here. But if we had an even number of groups, if we had another group here, then what would it do? It would skip this first part and go down to either left or right. And the reason for that is it would be something like this. So it would need to offset, and it would be 50% of that average group spacing, which we're not doing here. So I'm going to fix this. Oh, sorry, if it is odd, so if it is an odd count, so if it is, let's just pull that one out again. If it is an odd count, then we assign the position to the selection position, and we add the full selection spacing to both sides. It's an average, so yeah, that's a full plus the group. That's what that is. So 50% is full. We just don't care what the actual individual groups are at this stage, so it's a full spacing. So that's right. It's a full spacing plus the group spacing. And then for the left and right positions, so if it's a left position and it's not odd, so it's even, we're doing this. So we're adding 50% before we assign the position. We're adding 50% to the spacing, so we're adding that 50% selection spacing out this way. So we're adding 50% spacing and then 50% of the group spacing. Maybe that's the mistake. So this will be like this. It's halving the group spacing on each side. So I think what we do need to do is just do a full group spacing here. So let's take that out. Let's take that out down in the, in the here as well, in the right side. There we go. That's a bit of spacing we've just added. So that might have been our issue. So now we've got that, and then we go and do the second time we come through, the spacing is going to be higher than 0 because we've already added some, and it's just going to go through and, oh, sorry, so now that we've added that spacing to get the position here, we're going to do all the local offset stuff and add that position. And then after we've added that position, we're going to add the spacing in for the next position on the left side, roughly. And that'll be the same on the other side. And that's the formation. This is technically to the center, but yeah. So this total width here should be one of these. So if that looks right, that's the full spacing, full selection spacing, gets us to the next position. And so we've got group spacing, selection spacing, group spacing, selection spacing, group spacing, like all the way along. This one down here is just for when we're not doing the alternating left and right sides. We're just, like a column, we're just going one after the other. So we're just doing a set spacing each one, whatever the offset is. Right, so coming back up to our tasks here, we're up to assign groups to positions. So if we come back, so we're assigning the formation positions. So we're assigning a selection to those positions we just calculated, and we're doing that, through the distance thing. And then once the positions are assigned, so we know which entity is going where, they've got their data, whether they're on the left or right side, and their index, how far out to the left or right they are. And we can start calculating. So if they got a center side, that means they're, that they're this group here in the middle, and we're going to assign their position to that position, and then we're going to do the same again. So we're going to, however, this time what we're doing is we're using this position selection spacing. So if we have a look at this, we have in here, we have again selection spacing and group spacing. So let's have a look where this is set up. So when we created the formation positions, we created essentially a blank data for the position. So we have the location, and the offset and all that, and where it's pointing and what side it's on. That's all the default data. And then when we assign the position, when we assign the selected position, we go through and we actually update this data with. So we're updating the group spacing here with the actual group's spacing. That's fine. So where is for the formation position, where are we updating the selection spacing? Okay, so we're calculating it at the top of the update. So once we're doing the position, we're getting from the selection that's been assigned to this position, we're getting the selection spacing requirement, which is that function for this group. So that's updating there, getting group spacing there as well. I might move this to here, because it just keeps it in one place then. So selection is assigned just above, so that should be right. And that updates there, and then don't need it because that's the double up there, get group spacing, we don't need that. So now this is assigned, so let's check that we're doing the right thing again. So let's come to our diagram. We want to get the actual positions now, so let's do this again just to be really sure. We've assigned the group, so let's put them in. So this is the first position is assigned, it's the center, and we're doing that there. And now we're adding the spacing, so 50% of this selection spacing, so that's that. And then we're adding the group spacing, that's that. And then we're adding that to the left and right. Good enough. So that's that. So now we're going on to the next position. Let's say that's left. So the left position, we're adding spacing again. So it's different. So we're adding half the selection spacing for this new position. So this is the left. So we're going to copy this one. So we're adding this space. Well, let's just do it backwards. So adding group spacing. So whatever this group spacing is, let's say it's the same. We're adding that, and then we're adding 50% of this group spacing. Is this, and that gives us that group's position, which is there. So that's correct. And then we save that position. And then if there's another one, we add the spacing there. So we'd be doing this part again, but for this group. So like something like that. Doesn't quite line up. There we go. Fixed. So that would be ready for the next group spacing to come in if there's another one on the other side. And then we do the same on the right. So that the only issue I can see is this double up of group spacing. This is where I'll probably want to have a formation spacing, like I mentioned here. So that's our groups are assigned their positions. So we've got our positions sorted. And now we want to create our entity formation positions. So we're going to come in to create entity positions. So again, we're just going to use an average spacing again. So at the top here, the create entity positions, we're getting, what are we using? So we should go back actually. So for each position, so for each formation position, we're passing in the index. So this is now a selection. So we're doing one selection, and we're getting, for this selection, we're getting the number of entities, checking if it's odd, that's fine. And then we're creating this average spacing by getting the selection spacing, which you recall is set and should be correct to the size of the group. And we're just dividing it by the entity count. So we're getting the same sort of thing as what we did with the, the quick thing. But so what we're doing is this. So we've got that total spacing, and we're just dividing it up by how many entities are. We're not worrying about what size they are. And then we end up with something like this distance here. If this is, what's this, 4, something like that, right? So we end up with 4 positions, which could be slightly different when we go to deploy it, but they are. And then the average spacing is, entity spacing is this distance here. And then we're going to use that average spacing to calculate actual locations. So we're calculating those actual locations. So we're doing the same thing. If it's an odd count, then the position is the position, and we're adding the spacing after it, which is this one. So we're getting the position, adding the spacing left and right, which gives us the next position. If it's an even count, then we're adding half the average spacing first, which is that, and that gives us the position. And then the same as before, after the position, we're adding the full spacing, which gives us the next position. So that looks all good to get some quick positions. So up to, now we assign the entity positions. This is probably where we need to have a look in this. Do we have spacing in here? Spacing. Doesn't look like we're using that spacing. I'd say what I'm doing is calculating it. So update entity positions. We assigned all the entities to their positions. Now we want to calculate the real positions based on different size entities and whatnot. Yep, so it's doing it here. It's getting whatever entity is in this position, and it's going to the entity component and getting its minimum spacing. So required spacing. Is that correct? I don't think it is. That is not correct. Looking here, we're getting the required spacing. We're not getting the group entity spacing here. I'm going to cut this out of here and go back to here. I'm going to get this entity here. That is the entity, so we can cast from that. So this is getting the component of the entity that we're assigning to the position. And we're going to get the data here. Dot spacing. Let's change the name of this to a min. That's a min entity spacing. So that'll be whatever entity is assigned to this position, we're updating the position with that entity's minimum spacing. If we come back to, where was it? Create entity positions. Assign entity positions here. Something else we probably could assign. I'm going to go back to it's not the position, it's the, yeah, we can do another field here, I think, and we can call it group or entity spacing. I think that's what we called it on our sheet. So yeah, this one, group entity spacing. And we're going to assign that on the actual selection position data, so formation position. So we're going to assign that. So what we're going to do is assign that on the actual group when it's assigned. It's whoever's to that position. So let's just fix our thing here. What is it? Group entity spacing. And we don't want it in the constructor, that's fine. We want to assign it when we go to do our, let's change that to group entity spacing. While we're here, sorry, I'll do this first. Plus the entity positions min entity spacing. So this here will now be this plus this once we assign this, which is what we need to do now. But we're going to do that when we get the positions. Now this is for the group one, so come back up. Keep coming up. So this is inside the assign the selection to a position where we're assigning all this data. We then want to assign to this the, what was it, group entity spacing. I think we could do the same as this. We can just, actually I don't need to do all that. I can just do this. Let's just fix that up. And I think we might create a function on the selection to get there. I think that's what that group spacing is. Yep. So we might rename this in here to group. Oh no, that is the group spacing. We don't have a field for entity spacing, do we? Oh no, entity spacing, that's right there. So what is that? That's get entity spacing. Is there, oh, okay, so there's just no function on the selection data here for it. We can add that. We'll call it group entity spacing to match our diagram. Let's make that. And it's going to be the exact same as this here, except for it'll be get entity spacing, which I'm then going to rename to get group entity spacing. And I'm going to rename, no, that's all right, I'll leave that default entity spacing. It's on the group data, so it has context sense there. Coming back. Get group entity spacing. We should have all our data either on the group or at the entity. So coming back down to where we were, because we're just using it directly here. So now our required spacing should make more sense because it will be, so when we go to do, where is it? Required spacing, half the required spacing and half the group spacing. Have a look at that. I don't think that's right. I think what I was doing is trying to do this group entity spacing using the group spacing. That's another mistake there. That's, would have thought that would have added more, but yeah, we'll see. So to get the actual next position of an entity, as we can see here, it's going to be, so that's what it should look like there. Let's bring this down. So some rejigging of the diagram here. So the purple being the group entity spacing and the yellow being the required entity spacing, the first position will be 50%. Well, actually, sorry, so we saved into our required spacing here. It is the group entity spacing plus the min entity spacing. So it's group entity spacing, group entity spacing plus the entity group spacing, which is this distance here. Let's just line this up, which is that. And then to calculate the first position, we want to, doesn't quite line up, but you get the idea. Oops. That should be there. And that should be there. So to get the first position, it'll be half the group spacing, entity group spacing, and half the required spacing will give us the center of this position here. So it'll be that. So that's what we're doing here. We're getting, well, we were doing this group thing, but I think now all we need to do is this. So it's half the required spacing, because required spacing is a combination of those two. And this will be the same. And when we go to do, well, hang on, that's the center position, isn't it? So if it's in the center position, sorry, let's have a look at an even setup. So after an even setup, we want it to be that distance there, which is going to be a full spacing, half a required entity spacing, and half a required entity spacing. So I think we might need to keep it separate. Let's put this back. I think this is why this is separate. But we can just change it now. So let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of, actually, sorry. Let's copy these. Get rid of the variable, but we'll use these in place of these things. So entity spacing, and then required spacing is the entity's min spacing. For an even position with the center, after we've assigned the center position, so this one will be the minimum entity, or half the minimum entity spacing, plus the group entity spacing, plus another half. So it's going to be the full entity and group spacing. So we can take out this half here. And that should give us our offset positions left and right for an odd numbered group. And now when we come to do the left side, we're going to add our spacing. So we're going to add that half spacing for this entity. So now we want to, let's just make another little arrow here to help me with this. So this is to denote a half minimum required spacing. I'm getting squashy here. Let's make a new example. So this is a blown up example of the two center positions here. Yeah, the left and right position. So to calculate the position, well, I've gone right here, but to calculate the right position, we're going to need half the group entity spacing and half the entity min spacing. So the half this and half the entity spacing. Not sure what we're doing this. Let's get rid of that. That's going to throw it all out. And then, so that gives us the next position for this entity. And then when we go to do the next one, so let's just do this. We want to add this again. So we want to get something like that. And then, so this will leave the, I'm doing spacing left here, but the diagram spacing right. But this will be the rest of that spacing for that entity, because this amount isn't going to change, but these entity minimum spacings could be custom for each entity here. So we want to add that so the next position can start its calculation. So when the next right position comes in, it'll do this spacing here, and it'll be half again, so it'll figure out the half, and that'll be the position. So let's just update that to this, and half the group, and it's group entity spacing, not group spacing. So just to fix up the right side as well. And I'm just going to replace that, that's fine. So now that should do the entity positions, the exact entity positions. Diagram, it's getting out of control. So that's our formation positions done, and it should be more accurate now. Let's hope. Let's have a look. Just made a mistake somewhere. Oh, sorry, I just left that in, so that can come out now. That was where we were assigning the required spacing. I left them in so I could copy paste them. There we go, much better. We'll get our spacing. And they should move around. Oh, didn't notice that last time, but decals aren't moving with them. Must have got to attach it. Bugs, bugs, bugs everywhere, bugs. Alright, that's looking pretty good now. Except for the crappy animation. Anyway, just to complicate things a bit more, because this clearly isn't complicated enough for me, we're going to add in the formation spacing. And the way we're going to do that is in our group data, we're going to, because the data for a formation is grabbed from the lead group, then we're going to start out with just a formation spacing on here to define it. So on our group data, I'm going to add a default formation spacing, and yep, 250, that's fine, leave it like that. I might bring the group spacing down to 100 just so it doesn't get ridiculous, but let's make it 150, 150. All right, so, and then when we initialize the group, so come to group, we got initialize here. Sorry, let's create the variable first. So, yeah, under the command system, property, formation spacing. So this is be the current group's formation spacing. We do it on entities. If you do it on entities, you can have like different parts of the group having different spacing. For now, I'm just going to put on the group. Might move it later. So now to assign this initially, we're just going to come into here. In here, inside the group data, where we get the group data here, we are going to say formation spacing equals group data. Oops. Group data. Come on. There we go. Default formation spacing. We need to add it into every calculation. I didn't want to do it before because we were fixing the error in the current state, but now we need to do this so pretty much every time we use group spacing, we need to add in formation spacing or half the formation spacing, depending on what we're doing. So let's go do that, come back to well, actually, what I want to do first is go to the navigation data of the formation, so it makes sense to have the formation spacing as above positions. That fixes up our data, and then where we're using this, it's in here anyway. Here we go. So here we need to find our formation spacing, which we're going to do similar to this. Get formation spacing. So I want to get the leads group and then get the formation spacing. So we'll be doing this. So I am create the function. So on here, there, get formation spacing. we have a threshold, then we want to cast to our, oh, we don't need to cast, we just want to check it's valid. So we want to do selections, lead selection index, group, get, we don't have it, we'll do a function for it, oops. Get formation, spacing, and we can return that actually. Put in an arbitrary fallback there, and then on our group, we just need a get formation spacing. And this doesn't need to do the data, so I'm just going to put in line to return formation spacing. That's good, 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 good. It's assigned in our navigation data. And now we can start using it in our formation setup. Create formation positions. Let's go back again, look at the initial positions, and every time we're using this, we probably want to add formation, just add formation spacing. So, that's the average group spacing, isn't it? Where that's assigned, we're probably going to have to come back, hang on. So this is going off the selected. Well, let's get our formation spacing prior to this. And then let's pass our formation spacing in as a variable. And then we can just add it each time we add a group spacing, like so. So that factors it in for getting the average positions. Now we want to do it when we calculate the actual positions. So let's go to our formation data. Let's close the group data. Yeah, so that's factored into our average spacing now. We don't have to worry about it there. And then when we come to, then we assign it, we're assigning group spacing here. Yeah, so here, the get group spacing, we should be able to just add the is it navigation, formation spacing, the group spacing that is assigned when the unit's assigned. Entity spacing, it's not a factor, so we don't have to worry about changing that. So let's give that a bell and remember to update our group data with a formation spacing. I didn't do the, oh, it's got a default 150, we should be right. Come on there. Not sure what's happening there. One guy has extra spacing. I think I know what that is, because if you remember, I took it out here, but here, yeah, the left side, yeah, here. It's adding the, it's updating the min entity spacing with the spacing right, which is just going to exponentially, so the more units we would have had right, the spacing would just went up and up and up, doubling, doubling, doubling. Take that out, it should be right then. There we go. Now spacing's all good now. Excellent. One bug down. Probably many more to go. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next part.